Hello, dear listener. Welcome to my channel, where stories are so scary that only the bravest and most fearless can listen. If you are sure that you are brave enough, subscribe to my channel and I will question your bravery. But before you do, let me warn you, these stories are not for the faint of heart. They are not for people who scare easily. They are for people with ice in their veins and darkness in their hearts. If you are one of those people, then I welcome you. Come closer, listen closely, and prepare yourself for the horror that awaits. There are people who are greatly into the spiritual world. Whether you believe in this sort of thing is really just a moot point. Because at the end of it all, it doesn't matter if you're a believer of ghosts, demons, angels, and otherworldly things. It doesn't change the fact that they exist. Some people are just a bit more aware of their presence than others. And it's these sorts of people that they like to mess with the most. Number 1. It was the summer of 1966. I was 12 years old and visiting my family in Daegu, South Korea. I came from what people would refer to as a noble household, so it suffice to say that we lived in a pretty large house in the center of the city. The layout of our home was simple and practical. A large metal gate that surrounded our home, and once past the gate, you were able to gain access to the walkway that led up to the main house. Korea was still a developing nation, especially it being just a little over a decade after the conclusion of the Korean War. So, as it stands, a lot of homes have the bathrooms located outside of the main house. Yes, outhouses. Those things I'm sure most of you like to compare to as porta potties nowadays. The rain was pouring down. Korean summers are the equivalent to monsoon season, so heavy downpours were common. It was the middle of the night and I had to go to the bathroom. It was a little ways from the main house, and the fastest access was through the great room's side entrance through a sliding door. Grabbing the umbrella from the little container by the door, I had slipped on my outdoor shoes and opened up the umbrella just as I heard the sound of the door buzzer from the front gate. Looking over my shoulder, I squinted so I could make sure I could tell what time it was from the clock on our mantle. Nope, I hadn't been imagining it. It was just after 2 in the morning. Who in the world would be ringing the buzzer at this time of night? I stepped off the back porch onto the stone walkway, the rain thundering over my head against the umbrella. "Hello?" I called. There was no answer. My grandmother was a superstitious sort of woman. She always told me that when a stranger came to your door, especially in the middle of the night, you were always supposed to call out to it 3 times before going to answer the door. If you didn't call out 3 times and tried to answer beforehand, you would be snatched up by a tokibi, or what is commonly referred to as a goblin. The buzzer rang again, and I took another step forward. "Who is it?" Again, no response. The rain started to ease up some, but the buzzer didn't ring for a 3rd time. I wasn't relieved. Instead, my hand gripped the handle of my umbrella even tighter, and I took one more cautious step forward. "Who's there? Is anyone out there?" An uneasy feeling welled up inside of my chest. I chalked it up to it being late, raining, and needing to pee. After a few more seconds of silence, I turned to head off toward the direction of the outhouse when something appeared in the corner of my eye. I craned my neck slowly, turning to look back to the gate, only to see a pale hand appearing over the edge of the gate in the rain. Typically, most people would attribute this to just being another Asian person attempting to break into my house, but no human being was whiter than a sheet unless they had makeup. Waterproof makeup didn't exactly exist back then either. The arm belonged to a woman, long and slender and creeping ever so slowly over the edge of the gate. It was attempting to unlock the door. I hadn't even realized that I'd dropped my umbrella and was now completely soaked through from the rain. My voice had been lost in that moment before it returned promptly, and I let out a horrified scream before turning and attempting to make my way back into the house. I slipped on the wet gravel, my shoes flying off my feet completely as I fell to the ground. Still screaming, I managed to get myself off the ground and tore off to the house, only to slam my leg onto the edge of the porch. Later, I would learn that I had hit my leg so hard that I had busted the skin and my bone was showing, but no blood was coming out. It was so numb. By the time my family came out to see what in the world was going on, I was a soaking wet and shaking mess on the floor. My aunt came to see if I was alright, taking note of the terror on my face. I wasn't even aware of what was happening, and it took about 4 cups of hot tea and a Chinese herbal pill to finally calm me down. Once I'd gotten myself put back together, I told my uncle what had happened. There was no one there, he said. I blinked at him in disbelief. That couldn't have been true. There was no way I had been hallucinating. I know what I saw, Uncle. Someone was trying to get into this house. You don't remember, but in the middle of all your screaming, you were pointing to the door, so I went to see who might have been there. But when I opened the gate, there was no one. That was impossible. I'm not crazy, Uncle, I swear. I'm not saying you are, but you're lucky. If that was a ghost, you would have been in some serious trouble. I agree. I'm glad I hadn't opened the gate. Number 2. Most of my family lived out in the countryside. My dad was an active duty officer in the Korean military, so I was often shuffled around between my relatives during the holidays. I had opted not to go to high school since it was only required to finish out middle school. I couldn't afford tuition and my father couldn't be bothered, so I often just worked in the city and would come out to the country during my vacation days. Country life was peaceful, but there were a lot of the kids my age who often thought the simplest of things were the most amazing. Take movies, for instance. There were no actual theaters in Gyeongju in the early 70s, so whenever a movie would be playing, it often was showcased for outdoor screenings where most people would pitch up tents and watch the movie on a giant sheet. A lot of the movies they got were also dropped down very late in comparison to their release dates in the cities. I was 17 at the time and visiting my family for Chuseok, or Korean Harvest Festival. Coming down a couple of days early, so some kids were still in school. A lot of my friends whined and prodded me to come out to see a movie with them that night. The Red Scarf, it was called, about a Korean fighter pilot during World War II. I had already seen the movie when it debuted over in Daegu, and had told them this, but they weren't listening. It hadn't mattered if I had seen it or not. It had been months since they'd last seen me and wanted to hang out, so I didn't think anything of it. Since my family lived out in the country, not many buses ran in and out of town. The last bus had already come and gone, so my group and I just walked like we normally did. We still had a good bit of daylight before it was time for the movie, and we chatted amongst ourselves, catching up on the latest gossip and them grilling me on what life was like in the big city. On the way into town, there was a dirt road you had to walk along with a man-made lake off to the side that broke off into a clearing. During the off-season, some farmers had planted rice in the lake as a backup supply, but that had been back during the war. There really wasn't a need for it now, and I always wondered why no one had even bothered to fill up the lake. There weren't fish in it, and no one planted rice there anymore, so it just seemed like a wasted bit of space. Whenever I asked this question to any of the elders in the village, they simply said that they weren't allowed to touch it, and I, feeling that was all I needed to save my curiosity, left it at that. We made it into town where everyone had set up the tents, and after getting a few snacks, we sat down and watched the movie. They, of course, responded with the amazement I knew they would have. After chatting a bit more, we gathered up all of our stuff and started back on the dirt road back to the countryside where our houses were. Since most of the people I hung out with were guys, it didn't come as a surprise that they were the stereotypical country boys who like to get into scuffles like any young kids do. As we were walking back, said group of scrappy boys decided they wanted to pick a fight with my friends. I wasn't about to get tangled up in all of that, so when they left me on my own, I didn't think much of it. The only thing I was pissed off about was how they'd taken the only flashlight. After being abandoned, I made my way back onto the main dirt road heading back toward the country. There weren't streetlights back then, so I had to just trust my eyes and hope that they adjusted as best they could under the light of the half moon in the sky. The air was still, the cicadas crying their shrill songs along with the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt path. Though it was difficult to see, I knew that I would be approaching the man-made lake soon. Stuffing my hands in my pockets, I walked on without much thought to where I was really walking, my mind wandering to other things, my family, my friends, and what I was planning to eat when I got back to the house. A soft gust of wind brushed up against me, and I suddenly heard the soft cries of a young girl. Turning my head, I tried to peer into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything past 3 feet ahead of me. The crying seemed a little ways off, and I paused in my steps, turning towards the direction of the sound. "Hey, who's there? What's the matter?" The crying continued, coming closer, and I could hear the soft scuffling of feet on the ground getting just a little bit closer. "Are you lost?" "Don't cry, just follow behind me." The little girl's voice sobbed a little, hiccuped, and then continued crying softly, but now it seemed as though she were only a few feet from me. Motioning with my arm, I turned and started walking again. "Just follow the sound of my feet and voice, okay? I know it's dark, but just trust me." I continued walking, the young girl continuously crying behind me, but she kept her pace with me, so I was grateful that I didn't have to slow down further to help her. As we got closer to the lake, though, her crying suddenly grew louder, and it started to get annoying. There was only so much patience my 17-year-old self could give. I told her several times to stop crying, and she just wouldn't do it. When it got to the point that she was basically all but wailing in my ear, I stopped and turned around, even though I still couldn't really see anything clearly in front of me. "If you don't shut the hell up, I'm going to kick your ass into that lake. Stop crying." And just like that, the crying stopped. Everything was silent except for the sound of cicadas and the soft wind blowing through the trees. I took a moment and looked around, wondering if I had scared the girl into silence. "Hey, are you there?" But there was no answer. Nothing. After calling for her several more times, I figured she had gotten upset at my yelling and decided to go off on her own. Not thinking much of it, I turned and started off back to the path and went back to my uncle's house. When I got there, they asked why it had taken me so long to get back home, and I told them about the girl I was trying to walk home who left after I yelled at her to quit crying. My uncle's face drained of color, and when I asked him what was wrong, I could visibly see him swallowing the lump in his throat. A lot of people have drowned in that lake walking alone at night. They say the ghost of a young girl who committed suicide there will drag them into the lake with her before they get a chance to get past it. I never walked that path alone at night, ever again. Number 3. I have often been told that I was very in tune to the spiritual world, even as a child. I'm not sure if I really believe it, at least not the bit about me being able to see spirits and the light since I was younger, but I can't deny that I have always been able to feel the presence of unknown things around me. I had often brushed them off as being paranoid, but a lot of the elders insisted that I had power and needed to be more respectful to the spirits that belonged to the underworld. Years passed and I moved through various cities and intermingling with different people. I think I had changed addresses more in the last 5 years than anyone did in their entire life. Some locations were quiet and I was able to live my life in peace. Others were merely annoyances. I handled it like I always had, ignoring those weird feelings I often got, went about my normal routine in life. Wake up, coffee, work, drinks with my coworkers, home, dinner, and sleep. Rinse and repeat. I was 28 years old, living in Daegu and in the process of changing jobs again. Getting a job closer to the heart of the city, I couldn't be bothered to commute from the outskirts back into town every single day, so I opted to get a place inside the city within walking distance of my job. I was young and trekking several blocks every day wasn't going to kill me. There were very few places available in the city, even fewer that were reasonably priced and in a decent neighborhood. After sifting through the local newspaper, I lucked out and found a place that was on the market, and the pricing was reasonable as well. I went to the real estate agency in charge of having put the house up, and the agent looked at me in surprise. I didn't understand what his deal was, so I figured I would be like my usual blunt self and see what his problem was. What? Why are you looking at me like that? There was a moment of silence before he loosened his tie nervously. You are not from around here, are you? I'm from all over. Now tell me why you're looking at me so strangely. Well, there's rumors that the place is haunted, but even the fortune tellers say that whatever is in that house is a very angry spirit, stronger than anything they had ever felt before, and it's almost impossible to cleanse. Oh, come on, I scoffed and looked at him like he'd lost his mind. I must have mirrored the expression he had earlier. Well, almost. I'm sure I looked much more annoyed. You have got to be kidding me. No, I'm very serious. No one has ever made it longer than 3 months in that house. It's a place with very bad energy. I wanted to question why they didn't just tear the place down, but I remembered something my grandmother had once told me. That if there were bad spirits, angry spirits inside of a place, the last thing you wanted to do was disturb their territory. They would chase after every generation in your line until your own spirits and those of your family couldn't rest peacefully. Sighing, I shook my head and grabbed a pen from the cup on his desk. Just give me the paperwork. I'm moving in. It's the only place I can afford right now. Bring on the dead. It took almost no time for me to finish the paperwork and was moved into my new residence before the end of the week. The first couple of days in the house, I had probably subconsciously psyched myself out. There would be random noises in the middle of the night that attributed to it being normal seasonal noises of the home contracting and expanding based on the temperature outside. However, 2 weeks into my stay, things started to get a little bizarre. I came home late from my shift and hanging out with my coworkers. I was a little drunk and staggering into the house, dumping my keys and purse on the counter and peeled my clothes off layer by layer before collapsing into the bed. It didn't take long for me to fall asleep. Shh. I opened my eyes, greeted only by darkness as I heard the sliding door to my closet slip open slightly. I didn't have to see to know it had been my closet. I assumed it had just loosened itself. This place wasn't exactly brand new. Figuring it was just the house being obstinate and old, I rolled back over in bed to go back to sleep. Not even 5 minutes later, there was an incessant tapping on the wall above my headboard. It was like a demonic woodpecker trying to eat away at my wall. Drunk and frustrated, I sat up immediately and slammed my hand on the wall. Cut that shit out, I'm trying to sleep! Silence. Beautiful silence. I went back to bed and wasn't bothered for the rest of the night. About a month in my stay, I was able to enjoy the peace of the house. My routine wasn't broken, and outside of the occasional weird noise, a creak and moan from the floorboards or walls, I moved around relatively undisturbed. Again, I came home after a long day of work and a night out with friends. One of my girlfriends coming home with me because she had lost her house key and it was well past hours for her to get a new key cut. She wanted me to make food for her, and after that I put her up in the spare bedroom, and it didn't take long for her to pass out. After washing up, I went to my own room and settled in to have a good night's rest. I'm not sure if I was asleep for 10 minutes or an hour, but the temperature in my room immediately began to change. It was as if the warmth was being sucked slowly out of the room, the sudden shift causing me to move in discomfort in my sleep. The air started to grow thin and cold, and it was at this point that I woke up but kept my eyes closed. In the far corner of my bedroom was where the chill was coming from, seeping through the walls and filling my room as though a slow change in air pressure was happening. colder and colder. It started to grow to the point where I could feel my legs and arms trembling slightly beneath my blankets. That's when I felt it. You know that feeling you get when you know you're being watched? The sort of feeling that someone is hovering over your bedside looking down at you? You don't have to open your eyes and know that someone is there because you can just feel their presence. That was what I felt. Mere inches from my face. Had I opened my eyes, I'm sure I would have been staring back into the piercing cold eyes of some otherworldly creature. I kept my eyes closed. I didn't even breathe. Instead, I balled my hands into tight fists and squeezed, feeling my nails digging into my palms as the pain kept my mind clear and free of the fear that threatened to eat me up inside. There wasn't a sound being made in the room save from my own breathing, but I could still feel a face inching ever so closer to me, the room growing colder by the second. And then, a few seconds later, I heard the sound of tissue being pulled from the tissue box I kept next to me on my bedside table. 1, 2, 3. I sat up, threw the blankets off me, and screamed at the top of my lungs before grabbing the box of tissue and hurling it across my bedroom. Letting out another scream, I scrambled out of my bed and quickly turned on the lights, my chest rising and falling with each labored breath I took. I don't know what the shit you are, but you better get the hell out of here and stay out. You got that, you fucking cocksucker? There was nothing. Only silence. My friend who'd been staying with me that night came into the room, my screaming having pulled her out of her drunken slumber. When she asked me what was wrong, I told her that it was nothing and to just go back to bed. After she was convinced that I was, in fact, okay, she left to go back to her room. I went to the bathroom and splashed my face with cold water so I could free myself of the stress and anxiety that had washed over me. Then returned to my room so I could finally get some sleep. The cool feeling had left my room. Just as I was getting ready to get back into bed, I caught something on the floor out of the corner of my eye. There, by my bedside table, were 3 squares of tissue discarded on the floor. Christmas goes. I never really believed in supernatural stuff, but this incident made me believe otherwise. This was about 9 years ago in Samoa. I was playing hide and seek with the other little kids from my mom's village of Satua, Western Samoa. I was quite young then, so I always followed my older cousin around. It was the middle of the night, and most of the kids were used to hiding anywhere in the dark. I wasn't used to it, as I was only there for the Christmas holidays. I actually live in Australia. Anyway, we all went to hide. Since we were all hiding in the graveyard, we all found our way around in the light that the church cast onto the graveyard. We all hid in the shadows and waited for the boy. We could all hear the boy coming, so we kept quiet. The boy was pretty loud, so we watched what he was making a fuss about. He had walked into the church as he thought that his brother was hiding there. As he walked into the church, he later told us he saw a boy standing right at the front of the altar. He didn't know if it was his brother because the boy's back was turned. He ran up and tapped this boy on the shoulder. As soon as he did this, the strange boy disappeared, and our friend fainted. We went home to tell his parents, and returned with the boy's parents to find him still lying there, completely still. The parents took the boy home, and we never played in the graveyard at night again. We later found out that the boy's brother had been at home the whole time, and he hadn't been to the church at all. What really scared us was that the boy who fainted has been ill since that night, and he still hasn't recovered to this day. Whoever it was in the church must have been pretty mad that we kids had disturbed him. The Christmas visitor. I had an unusual visitor on Christmas Day, 2008. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't Santa Claus passing by my house in Bloomington, Indiana. The day started in typical fashion, with the opening of gifts around the Christmas tree. I served an early Christmas dinner for family and friends, and everybody departed by 5 p.m., except my sister and brother-in-law who lived with me. They were sleeping in a bedroom at the end of the hall with the door open. I went into my bedroom with my dog, Toby, and shut the door securely. Toby curled up on the foot of my bed to sleep, like he always does. It was chilly, so I pulled the blankets and comforter up around my head and curled up to take a nap for an hour. I was just dozing off when I heard the latch on my bedroom door open. I waited several seconds for my sister or brother-in-law to ask me whatever they came to say, but there was no other sound. It was almost 7 p.m., so my bedroom was pitch black. I'd left lights on in the kitchen and the bathroom, and there were lots of Christmas lights in the living room, so the hallway would have been well lit. I would be able to see whoever was at the door just by lifting my head. I pushed the blankets down and lifted my head from the pillow. But just as I would have been able to see who was in the doorway, an extremely bright light hit me right in the eyes. I shielded and yelled, "Turn out that effing light! You're blinding me!" The light immediately disappeared, and I heard the bedroom door latch closed. My bedside light is a touch lamp, so I tapped it on and looked around the bedroom. There was no one in the bedroom except me and Toby. Toby jumped off the bed and went to the door without showing any signs of alarm. At first I was frightened because Toby is a Dutch Shepherd, well trained to be an excellent watchdog and proven personal protection dog. Since Toby was already up, I decided to go let him outside and see what sis or brother-in-law needed. When I went into the hallway, I could see both of them still in bed. I took Toby to the living room to let him outside, and there was nobody there either. So who opened my bedroom door and turned the spotlight on my face? Ordinarily, I'm not a skittish person, and strange noises or lights wouldn't alarm me. But this situation was just too eerie, and the light had made my skin crawl. Let me add that the latch of my bedroom door is broken in such a way that the inside door handle must be jiggled for the latch to pop out and engage. It makes a very distinctive sound that I'm used to listening for, because if it doesn't latch, the door swings open. I am absolutely positive that the door was latched closed when I got into bed, just as I'm certain it was the door latch I heard during the incident. When I left the bedroom, the door was latched closed again. I couldn't understand how my sister or brother-in-law could have come into my room and then returned to their own bed and crawled under the covers in the few seconds it took me to reach the hallway. But I figured it had to be one of them, since Toby always barks and growls at everybody and everything he doesn't immediately recognize. When my brother-in-law got up to get ready for work that night, I asked him what he wanted earlier in the evening when he opened my door. He looked puzzled and said, "I never got up, and I certainly never opened your door. I slept soundly the whole time I was in bed. Okay. I then asked Sis, "Did you want something earlier this evening when you opened my door?" She also looked puzzled and said, "I doze off and on, but I never go out of bed and I never saw or heard anything in the hallway." She leaves her bedroom door open at all times, and she faces the hallway so she can see whoever is coming or going throughout the house. So who was my special Christmas visitor? And how did they get in and out so quickly? Like most people, the thoughts of loved ones are always close at hand during the holiday season. When I first went to lie down, I was thinking how happy I was that my small family had enjoyed a pleasant Christmas. What would have been so much better if my mother or brother had still been alive to share it with us. I would like to think it was my brother's spirit stopping by to say, "Merry Christmas. I still think of you too." I haven't been able to debunk this strange event or find any kind of rational explanation. I'm half afraid that my heart stopped during my sleep, and the light I saw was the bright light people report after near-death experiences. Leave it to me to see the stairway to heaven and ruin my chance at eternal paradise by saying, "Turn off that effing light." I've made a mental note that if I ever see another bright light, to clean up my language, just in case. Christmas Ghosts Caress. It was Christmas time of 1995 or 96 at my aunt's house on a reservation in North Dakota. Some of my family was in the living room watching television. The kids were playing in the rooms or sleeping, and my uncle, aunt, and I were sitting at the table putting a puzzle together. My cousin, who worked at a casino, would come home around midnight or 1 a.m. This night, as she pulled up and was walking toward the house, she looked in the window and saw me sitting at the table, my uncle sitting across from me, and someone standing to the left of me, and someone standing in the corner. So she continued to walk in the house, thinking nothing of it. When she got in, she said her hellos, put her stuff away, and came and joined us at the table. As we were sitting there talking, she looked at me and asked who was standing next to me a few minutes ago, and who was in the corner. I told her no one, and she said, "Yeah, there was someone standing right next to you. It looked like your mom, and she was playing with your hair." I have long hair, which I used to wear down all the time. She said this person was running her hand on my hair, like a mother does to a child. It kind of freaks me out, being I was probably only 12 or 13 at the time. My cousin swears up and down that someone was standing over me, rubbing my head, and watched me put the puzzle together with my aunt and uncle, and that there was another person standing behind this person. We got around to thinking it was probably her mom she saw. She passed away on her birthday a week before Christmas, back in '92. In my family, we consider our aunts and uncles to be just like our mothers and fathers. After thinking that it could have been her, it didn't scare me as much. However, we couldn't figure out who the person was standing in the corner. And always around Christmas time, something strange always happens. Poltergeist. It started one Christmas. My parents and I live in a small home that was around 90 years old. It was in a small town called Bluffton in northeast Indiana. The year would have been around 1996. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old to the time I was 19. From the very day that we moved in, I felt that I was not alone. At night, I would lie in bed with the intense feeling that I was being watched. One year around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heat had just shut off briefly, and she and I were sitting in the living room watching television when the temperature dropped substantially. As I rose to turn up the heat, the Christmas tree began to shake violently. Ornaments were falling off right and left, and she and I were terrified. We ran upstairs and laid down on my bed. My white cat curled up with us, and my door was open slightly. When I gazed out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall, white figure run down the hall. I turned to my friend, and she acknowledged that she had seen the exact same thing. She'd never spent the night ever again. Years passed, and things were uneventful. I became severely ill with a chronic illness, and was frequently hospitalized. That's when things began again. After coming near death twice, I began to be able to sense things that no one else could. I once again felt that nagging sensation of being watched. I ignored it this time, and the illness went into remission. Once again, the activity, if you could call it that, stopped. When I was 18, I began to experience things like never before. Upon the death of my beloved grandfather, I had become preoccupied with death and frequently visited cemeteries. That's when I noticed an increase in activity. It started out with the voices. It was like a television had been turned on, and there was a flurry of voices coming from downstairs, or, even more frightening, outside my room. My parents were always asleep when this would happen, and their room was right next to mine with a vent, so I could hear my parents sleeping next door. I would get up and check all the rooms, but there was no TV on, nothing to account for the voices. I was getting more and more scared as the voices started happening every night. Then that's when I started seeing shadow figures. They varied in size, but they were always human-shaped, except for one. One night I was walking out of my room with my cat in my arms when she began to growl ferociously. She never does this. She normally is an extremely docile cat, and I was shocked to see her acting so. That's when I looked down the hall and saw a shadow the size of a large dog run down the hall quickly. We don't own a dog. We had owned one before I became ill, but were forced to give it away due to the fact that we could no longer provide it with the proper care that it deserved. My cat growled, and growled until the shadow disappeared. For all the other times that I saw shadow figures, they never took the form of a dog again. From that point on, the shadow figures were strictly human-shaped, some tall, some child-size, but they frightened me to death. I would lie in my bed at night, tortured by the fear that I was going insane because no one else was experiencing this. When I confessed my experiences to my parents, they took me to a psychiatrist who could find nothing wrong with me. I continued seeing the shadow figures up until the last few months that we lived there. As the months went on, I began feeling a dark aura spreading around the place. It was a heaviness, an uncomfortable feeling that I could never quite shake. Sometimes I would get frustrated with whatever was there. I would leave a room and would turn off the light. The light switch would make an audible click every time someone turned it on or off. Each time I would shut it off, the click would echo, and I would turn around and the light would be back on. Finally, I said in an annoyed voice, Quit playing games. Could you shut the light off, please? And sure enough, right before my eyes, the light shut off. One time I shut off the light in my bedroom before I left the house. When my parents and I came home, my dad said to me, "What did I tell you about leaving your light on?" I replied, shocked. "But I shut it off before I left." I had nothing to say to that. Another time I was laying in bed when I heard the audible noise of something sitting down in my desk chair. Sure enough, when I sat up, there was a visible imprint in the center of the chair where someone would be sitting. Things would get so bad sometimes that I would be forced to sleep in my parents' bedroom, like I was a child. In August 2008, we moved to a new house, far away from the old house. I have not experienced anything abnormal here, and the aura is much lighter. Perhaps it was my dabbling in the paranormal. I had tried communicating with spirits, had frequented cemeteries, and tried to provoke ghosts that had caused all the grief in that house in the first place. But one night, I went back there to get some of my things. And as I was leaving, I saw a dark figure run across the yard. I drove away and never looked back. The Ouija board. Sometimes it seems like a helpful tool, and other times it appears to be a gateway to more troubling and even sinister entities. Here are several true stories from Ouija board users. Number 1. I never believed in any of this sort of thing until I saw it with my own eyes. In the fall of 1998, my friends and I spoke of doing a Ouija board. Skeptical as I was, I gladly accepted the opportunity. We didn't have a board, and I didn't want to drive forever to look for one. So my friends and I made one. It was a piece of cardboard with the lettering on it. We even put the sun and moon in the top corners. For the indicator, we cut out a triangular piece of cardboard, which had to be moved with force, since it didn't slide smoothly, like the ones sold at stores. We lived in Huntsville, Texas, and the day we decided to do it, Martin Garul, a prisoner who was on death row for murder and had escaped, had just been found dead in the river, not too far from my friend's house. The house was old and decrepit, with a middle room that could have been a second living area, but at the time was being used for a bedroom. 10 of us gathered around the board in that room, the only light coming from a large cake candle we had. Now all night, a couple of my friends were saying, "Let's talk to Garul." We sat around the board, and Tanner and Melissa were the only ones who were going to touch it. Tanner had never done anything like that, but Melissa claimed to have witnessed how it was done. They put their hands over the indicator, and Tanner asked, "Are there any spirits out there tonight?" I know it's corny, but that's what somebody said he should say. Then, the indicator moved. Now this was very shocking, because their fingers never actually touched the indicator. Each merely had their index and middle finger hovering 2 inches above it. As soon as it moved, very slowly on my dad, it amazed everyone. The shock made those who were skeptical, like myself, at least curious and quiet. It moved too. Yes. From that moment, I only remember a few of the questions. I remember when Tanner asked, "What is your name?" It replied, "Used to be Guru." At that moment, I said, "This isn't how Guru is spelled. I thought it was spelled Guru Lee." Chad retorted and said that he had seen it in the papers and it was Guru. Then some weird stuff happened. Tommy was sitting next to me and he nudged me. He said, "Did you see that?" Before I could answer, Chad said, "I saw it." Personally, I did not. But later they said the left side of the indicator picked up off the board and was dragging on the right. I did, though, see this amazing impossibility that made me believe even further. Their fingers were over the T, and the indicator quickly slid over to the A. Their fingers were still over the T on the other side of the board. They just pulled their hands away after they saw that. Now this whole time, I felt claustrophobic and stifled. My chest felt compressed, and there were lumps in my throat. Then we asked the question that verified that it was real. Shay was sitting on the bed, about 4 feet from the board. He said Martin Gurul went to high school in the Corpus Christi area, when he didn't know where, as he traveled a lot as a high school FFA officer. He knew most of the schools there. No one else that was there had ever been to Corpus Christi, or knew anything about it. Tanner asked Gurul where he went to high school. The indicator slid to the R, and then to the A. And Shay's eyes watered, and he moved to sit right by the board and said, "No way." Then it went to the Y. Shay said, "The Ray Texans. It's a school in Corpus." This shocked everyone, and I think they all felt stifled in the same way I did. At this point, Tanner ran into the kitchen and turned on the light. He had goosebumps and his eyes were watering. I remember it as if it were yesterday. He said, "I'm not going back in there, Tommy. There was something around me in there." This house belonged to Tommy, so he said, "Well, go ask it to leave then, because if there is something in here, I want it to go." After he was coaxed, Tanner went in and asked it to leave. The indicator went to no. He asked it again, and it still replied no. He asked a third time, and it went toward no. Then went to the middle of the board and stopped all movement. We would not move again, so we went to the back porch and burned the board while some of us smoked. When we went inside, as soon as the last person entered the kitchen and shut the door, the pots fell off the counter, and the pictures under the magnets on the refrigerator fell to the floor. Everyone was silent. Tommy and Shay slept in the other room that night, and took the deer heads off the wall. They didn't want them to talk to them in the middle of the night. I understand completely how the mind makes people think they see things they do not. But that night, there was no other explanation. No one in that room knew where Gurul went to high school, and the only one who knew any schools in that area was sitting away from the board. It could not have just randomly gone to those letters. I got on the internet and found out by the end of that semester that Gurul did attend Ray High School. Lots of strange things happened around that house after that night. I spent a lot of time over there, and screen doors would swing wide open and shut. The power breaker would flip on and off for no reason. They said the television would turn on and off. I know that it is possible that this could have possibly been explained, but that night was the only time I was absolutely sure that I had witnessed a supernatural phenomenon. Number 2. I used to live in a haunted house. In fact, we were in a book called the Bonoko Ghost Book. A huge family was massacred by the Indians, and their souls are still wandering. We had many, many experiences with the children of the family. We started using a Ouija board, and I found a spirit. A little boy who was killed with an axe by a man he thought was his father. A few years later, I decided to use my board again. The spirit located me again and led me to his grave. Interestingly enough, on the gravestone was a carving of a little boy with a man behind him, and behind the man, an Indian with what was probably their version of an axe back then. I believe the Indian killed the boy, but the boy thought it was his father. When I reported back to him, he seemed to be at peace with this information, and I have never heard from him since. I've communicated with spirits for years, but this was the first interactive type of experience I ever had. Number 3. This happened when I was 9 years old. I spontaneously purchased a Ouija board from the store because it looked like an exciting game. I'd never heard of them before and had no idea what it was. Consequently, I was confused when I brought it home, and my mother became very angry when she saw it. "Those things are not toys," she said. "In fact, God forbids using them because they're considered a tool for sorcerers and black magic." I was raised in a very religious family. She didn't take it away from me, but I was scared to use it. A few months later, though, during summer vacation, my sister and I decided to take it out and give it a try. The usual thing happened. Nothing. My sister, who is 4 years older, then decided to try and contact my dead grandmother, Dorothy, called Dot, who died before I was born. We asked for our grandma, and the board spelled out, "Hello, girls." Now, before I continue, it's important to understand how we were positioned in the living room. My sister was sitting on the couch, and I was sitting on the edge of the coffee table. The board was between us on a large footstool. We'd been watching movies earlier that day, and there was an orange plastic bowl of leftover popcorn on the other side of the room on the floor. My back was to the bowl, but my sister could see it clearly. Anyway, I was about to ask Grandma a question when my sister took her hands off the planchette and screamed. She cried, "Oh my God," and pointed over my shoulder. I turned around to see the bowl of popcorn hovering about 2 feet off the ground. For some reason, I was really mad. I knew it wasn't our grandma, but something else. The planchette was skidding across the board wildly, with my hand still on it. So I took my hands off it and cried, "Knock it off!" The bowl flipped over and fell to the ground as popcorn scattered everywhere. The planchette stopped skidding and flipped itself over. I believed Mom's warnings after that. My sister was so scared that she refused to ever touch a Ouija board again. I broke the board in two and threw it away right then and there. It was a little too weird for the both of us. I've played with Ouija boards since then, but nothing as strange as that has ever happened yet. Number 4. A friend had a blind dinner date at a guy's apartment and was afraid to go alone. So she roped me into coming along and being set up with his roomie. After dinner, they wanted to play with their Ouija. I refused. It was exactly 9 months from the day my father had died, and I was feeling pretty out of it. I was wearing jewelry he'd given me, as well as one of his t-shirts and one of his sweaters to feel closer to him. The room was dark, and I began to feel as if the oxygen was leaving the room. They asked the Ouija who it wanted to speak to, and it began to spell out my childhood nickname. Cheryl didn't know it because she was a fairly new friend. She'd never even known my dad. I made a noise and said, no. Then told Cheryl I wanted to leave right then and there. They asked who it was, and it spelled my father's name. And again, no one there knew it. I got upset and said I knew it was lying. The candles blew out, and Cheryl screamed because she said she could not move her hands off of the pointer, and neither could the boys. They were dumbfounded. I began to be choked by an invisible entity, and I was writhing on the floor and calling for my dad to help me. Meanwhile, our friend had been sent to pick us up at 8 p.m. for us to go out with him. He heard us screaming. He came in, and everything seemed to rush out of the room. He dragged me out and locked me in the car, and then went back in for Cheryl. We never spoke of it again. The guys tried to call us and apologize and get us to talk about the incident. We told them to leave us alone. Number 5. At age 7, I bought my first Ouija board. I have always liked horror, and when my mom told me that game is where you talk to the dead, I couldn't resist. So I had played at my friend Ryan's house a lot when I was 8 and he was 7. We always played when it was dark. We had talked to a bunch of people, but each of us thought it was the other person moving it. One time we played and got someone named Amanda. She said that she could come out. We didn't understand, so we stopped playing. Ryan started feeling cold and said he felt someone breathe on his neck. Later that same day, Amanda must have been around my house. No one was home. My sister was at dance. My mom had gone to pick her up, and my dad had gone to my uncle's house. Nothing was happening. Ryan and I just sat on my bed in the basement, counting some fake money we had stolen from my sister. All of a sudden, we felt a breeze. We both looked at each other. Then the dream catcher above my bed began to move. No air conditioning was on then. Nothing but silence in the house. Ryan and I got up and ran upstairs to the family room. There was a big light hanging from the ceiling and a mirror to our left. I went over to turn the stereo to my right when I felt something move. I turned around and looked at Ryan, who had been behind me. We both looked up, and the light was shaking. We both screamed and ran up to the 3rd floor to Michelle's, my sister's, room. She had a radio. Ryan sat on her bed, and when I turned it on, everything on the shelf began to shake. We ran to my parents' room and called our parents. Unfortunately, Nothing ever happened. Again. Number 6. I feel very strange telling you this, but this was an incident that happened 2 years ago, and still leaves me perplexed. My best friend and I had been using OUIJA for 4 years before this happened. We usually contacted the same spirits who claimed that they had been our soulmates in many lives. Because of this, they tended to get a little overprotective, moody, and act like typical guys when it comes to real men in my life. Usually, they would claim that if I liked a guy, it was because he was an incarnate of one of them. But with one particular boyfriend, the spirits had a big problem. On many occasions, Ervim, the most protective of the spirits, told me I had to break up with my boyfriend, that he was a demonic sort of spirit that would do eternal harm to mine. I ignored Ervim, saying that I couldn't break off a perfectly good relationship based on the jealousy of a spirit. But Ervim persisted. One day, he asked me to look at my drawing pad. I looked, and found that one page in my new book had become wet and had dried, leaving behind traces of a yellowish substance. Upon tracing lines around the yellow impressions, I realized he had left me a note written in the angelic alphabet, as seen in Buckland's book. I went home and translated the alphabet, and it read, "Beware, bats." That phrase meant nothing to my best friend, but it did mean something to me. My boyfriend, the very one Ervim was warning me about, was an avid collector of bat paraphernalia, and even had a bat tattooed on his back. The really creepy thing about all this is that I finally did break up with my boyfriend, because he told me that he believed he was a fallen angel, and that he could produce an ethereal alter ego to avenge his sorrows. The point is that my boyfriend did turn out to be psychotic, if not demonic, and Ervim had given me the physical proof to believe so. No one but myself, in my immediate circle, is familiar with the angelic alphabet. No one knew about the bats. No one had a chance to draw on my art. And with a plot. Number 7. I've been fascinated with the Ouija board as early as the age of 10. I distinctly remember when I was 13 years old, while my mom was at work. I invited a couple of friends over, and there were 5 of us. When we tried to play the Ouija, the planchette would not move. When one boy named Jose gave up, he removed himself, and we proceeded to ask questions. Amazingly enough, the planchette started to move. It spelled out his name in the word holy. Being very daring and dumb, we asked it to prove that it was with us. We asked it to do something. A few questions later, we heard a weird voice. We all got creeped out and got quiet. Jose had turned on a cassette of mixes and jams and was playing it quietly in the dining room. Then we all heard this monstrous voice on the tape say my name. Margie. It was a slow, deep, horrible voice, and we all screamed and ran outside. Since then, I will never play the Ouija. We all heard that evil voice, and it was not imagined. For more bone-chilling narratives that will keep you at the edge of your seat, subscribe to my channel. By doing so, you'll gain access to a growing collection of real-life horror stories that will both captivate and energize your senses. Join the community of fellow enthusiasts, and together, let's explore the eerie unknown. Subscribe now, and prepare for more terror-themed true tales that will leave you craving more.